The world is telling us as men to be common, to fall in line, to fall short of any visions or plans God has for us. But what about being uncommon? This is a movement of men seeking to build an eternal legacy. A journey of men on mission to rise above the common to experience sustainable life change. This is Uncommon Disciple. Welcome to the Uncommon Disciple podcast. My name is Michael Bowen. With me, as always, is Jared Gibson.
Hello.
And our very special guest today, Patrick Neville. What's up, Patrick?
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Hey, just a little introduction about Patrick. Patrick, and I'm going to use the Wikipedia description of you, Patrick, if you don't mind, is an American politician and a member of the Colorado House of Representatives from the 45th District, which includes much of Douglas County, a Republican. Neville served as a minority leader of the House, having been elected to this position at the beginning of his second term in January of 2017. And something I didn't realize, Patrick, as I was doing some research before the podcast, is that your dad's in politics as well.
Yes, he is. Yeah. So we were always kind of active as kids. He always kind of had us walking precincts and being civically active. And so he got in right before me, totally different district and, different county. But yeah, he was involved and inspired me a little bit, but you can probably get into that story a little more and why I got into politics.
For sure. Now, something that listeners might also want to know is, I met Patrick, I don't know, maybe close to a year ago. We go to the same church. And then recently his family started coming to the same community group that Jared and I belong to, which is pretty awesome. So I've gotten to get to know his family pretty well. And it's been just an amazing journey. But Jared, I'll give you a funny inside story that Patrick may or may not remember.
Okay.
So my son had a crush on his daughter, Kate, right? And Song got all weird about it, right? Because this is her son's first crush, right? So we're at a gas station down on Wilcox. Do you remember this, Patrick? Right? So we see Patrick, pumping gas on his side, and we were heading to the airport. I think we were heading out of town or something. And I just see Song go, "Hey, I think that's Kate's dad." And Caleb just literally is about to sink down into the back of the seat. And she jumps out of the car and starts saying stuff. And, and it was like, "That was weird, honey." Yeah, my son's got a crush on your daughter, one of those deals. You remember that?
I do remember that.
What were you thinking when my crazy wife got out and then I came out and introduced myself as well?
I recognized you as I walked in the gas station. I didn't recognize your wife as much. As quickly, I actually opened the door for her. And then, I don't think she recognized me after the fact. And she yelled it out from the car. And I was like, "Oh, okay, well, that's great. My daughter's probably not ready to date. It's my daughter, But hey, I know you guys go to the church, so that's not such a bad thing, right?"
Yeah.
He's probably a good kid.
So I was like, I got to know this guy. If my son got a crush on his daughter, I just got to, I need to know this guy. He's a good guy, not a good guy.
Right. But that's why we started coming to your community group. The whole reason. I'm just kidding.
To check me out. It's
got to scope it out instead, right?
It's interesting because the Lord had put a verse on my heart before the podcast, Patrick. And from what I've gathered about you and as we've gotten to know one another, you are a man of integrity. You are a man that's living this life set apart, uncommon disciple, what we stand for here. And Philippians 1:27 says this: "Only let your conduct be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come to see you or am absent, I may hear of your affairs, that you stand fast in one spirit, with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel." The Lord had put that on my heart before the podcast as I was praying. Excited that you were coming on for sure, and we were trying to make this happen for a little while. But your conduct has been worthy of the gospel of Christ. From every time I see you at church, the community group, your wife has been in here to our jiu-jitsu academy, and just encouraging us. And so we're grateful that you were able to come on. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having me. Yes, and you mentioned my wife. That's truly probably my best asset.
Yeah. That's a great answer, buddy.
Yeah.
So, hey, let's talk about your early faith journey. You've got an amazing testimony that we'll hit on. You're first a veteran of the Army, Bronze Star winner. You're a survivor of the 1999 Columbine massacre here in Colorado. You're heavily involved in politics. You have an amazing family, and just how do you do it? Right. So let's talk about the beginning. Let's talk about your faith journey, when you came to faith, and what that looked like growing up in a household of your dad must have been in politics for a lot of your life. Is that true?
No, actually, he wasn't in politics at all, just other than being civically active.
So, awesome. So tell us about it.
Yeah, we would go walk precincts. I would go to the caucuses with them, and we kind of knew about politics and knew to be civically engaged. But other than that, we were never had any dreams to be elected myself.
Sure.
And he didn't have the same aspirations. We just were politically active. And so I grew up, my faith journey is a little different. I grew up Catholic, so I kind of knew Jesus, but didn't really know Jesus the way I know Jesus now, for sure. A little bit of a different journey. So I grew up Catholic, had a pretty good life. Columbine definitely changed a lot in my life. I was a 15-year-old kid, probably making most bad decisions. My wife gets mad at me because I'll say I was making every bad decision a 15-year-old can make. My wife says, no, you weren't making every bad, but I was making a lot of bad decisions for a 15-year-old kid. So I'll leave it at that.
Did she go to Columbine as well?
She did not. So she went to Dakota Ridge, and I'll get into that a little bit here. But so I went to Columbine High School, and that was a wake-up call for me. I had a good friend in my high school class. His dad was the assistant baseball coach. My dad was the head coach of our baseball team. His dad coached me through soccer, all through elementary school, through junior high school. And we started drifting apart in high school. So Columbine happened when I was at the end of my sophomore year of high school.
Mm-hmm. Tell us about that day, if you don't mind.
Yeah. And so it happened at the end of my sophomore year. My friend and I, we started drifting apart because I was making a lot of bad decisions. Meanwhile, he was...
What does that mean? You just... you were drifting with another crowd in school, basically?
Definitely.
Yeah.
My grades were going down. For instance, on the day of the actual shooting, I was walking out and going to smoke on the, walking outside of school grounds to go smoke with friends.
Yep.
And just tobacco, nothing else. But,
what's funny is Jared and I we have this discussion. He'll talk about being, bad kids. There were some bad kids, or I did some bad things, and his bad things were like G-rated things to me, growing up. Right. So like you, I think when I was 15 in high school, I was the kid that was cutting school, going out to smoke cigarettes with my friends, or going to drink alcohol at someone's house. I mean, that was most of my high school life, because I had no parental supervision whatsoever. So you were kind of drifting in that direction, meaning, you were cutting school or leaving school early to go smoke cigarettes and, just talk about nonsense.
Well, I mean, it wasn't cutting school, but I was going to my, it was our lunch break, and that's what I was going to do. And meanwhile, my friend was sitting there studying in the library, and he was getting straight A's. He was on the football team. He was the lineman, and he lost his life. And so that was a big moment for me, because I remember, we ran away. The whole day is kind of a blur to me still to this day, over 20 years later. And looking back, I can't remember every aspect of it, but the thing that sticks in my mind most was his dad. So after the shooting took place, we all kind of met at my old elementary school. It wasn't far from our actual high school, and that's Leewood.
That's where you evacuated to?
And that's Leewood Elementary School. Mm-hmm. So that's where we met up, and we were kind of like trying to figure out who was there. Of course, we knew some people probably didn't make it through. We had no clue, though. And I'll never forget his father running up to me and saying, "Pat, have you seen my son?" And I hadn't. And just the fear and worry in his eyes. Mm-hmm. And then finding out later that he would never see his son alive again. I mean, it just really hit me. I'm just this 15-year-old kid going through that and thinking, why him? Why not me? I'm the bad kid. Yeah. He was doing the right things. Like, okay, so then you go through it all. You go through the different funerals that we had to go through, visit his house, obviously, and you start to reflect as a young kid. And a lot of what the institution was like putting down at the time was let your your kids spend time with their friends to cope with this and everything. And my parents actually saw that as a bad thing, and probably because of the crowd I was hanging out with. Yeah. And so good parents, they actually, especially my dad, was like, no, we're clamping down on you. Like, no, you're going to go to church. You're going to go to these funerals, go to these different things. And that's probably what made me really reflect on it and saying, how can I change my life to honor my friend?
Got it.
And that's when I really started turning my life around. And obviously very, 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 very young in my walk with Jesus at that point. But at the same time, like knowing that, okay, I want to make my life make a difference. And so it was like at that point in time, I realized, all right, I need to start getting better grades. I need to start hanging out with a new crowd. I need to, at that point, like it was probably a month later, I'm like, I want to join the military and serve in the military. I thought that was the best way I could serve. And so it set me on a new trajectory for sure in my life. And then, the Lord's been so good to me. So I turned 16 shortly after that, and I'm working restaurant jobs and stuff. And
I saw that you worked at a Mexican restaurant.
Worked at a Mexican restaurant, a sports bar, and those were cool jobs. They were fun and all. And then I walked into the Gap one day and I got a shirt on clearance because being a high school kid, I couldn't afford anything at the Gap. But I found a shirt on clearance and it was like $6 or something.
Well, at least you were wearing Gap, dude. I was wearing like Metallica and Iron Maiden t-shirts or whatever.
Columbine is actually very preppy. So, I was like, okay, I couldn't afford Abercrombie, but I could do Gap, especially on clearance. And so I go down to buy the shirt and man, this girl behind the counter, she was really, really cute, like so cute. So I actually asked her.
I hope you're talking about Kristi.
We'll get there, man. You're ruining the story. You're ruining the story. So I said, hey, dear, you guys are hiring? Do you have an application? And she's like, yeah, we are. And Kristi doesn't remember any of this, but I remember it clearly. And actually applied for a job at the Gap and got it. And
because of her?
Totally because of her. Absolutely because of her. And then I was too chicken to ask her out. So I worked at the Gap the whole time. And then
that must have been a little awkward, man. Just like having this huge crush on the girl that you first talked to, and you're like, hey, we were folding shirts.
Well, so I was working there for a long time, but then she was actually out of the country doing like this different thing in England or actually in Northern Ireland. But she was doing that, and so I'm like, gosh, I haven't seen this girl. And we do this big like event back at Funplex, Fat City. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but it used to be this big place in Littleton where you did this bowling alley, and she showed up to that. I was like, yes, she's here. It's so cool. But I was too chicken to ask her out because she was way out of my league.
Yeah.
But I laughed because I say, I found out later that I didn't know at the time, but I was one of 2 straight guys working there. And so that's why I landed such a pretty wife, is because I had no competition.
There you go.
And I locked her up early before, she realized she could do better.
That's good strategy, buddy.
Yes.
Good.
Hey, that was my strategy. Like when I met my wife, she was 19. So, when we started dating, I was like, I'm going to lock this up.
Yeah.
Before you get any second thoughts.
Yeah. Lessen the inventory pool.
Exactly.
So good. Did you guys get married fairly young?
We got married fairly young. So
before you joined the military?
Yeah, it was. So I was actually going to be, I had an enlisted contract. I was, you'll get this, going through MEPS and everything with the Air Force. And then I met with a Navy commander, and the Navy commander convinced me, no, wait till after college to go in. And he actually linked me up with the Navy ROTC program at CU. And I was in, everything was good. They said, apply. It was too late to hit the application for CU Boulder at that time. So they're like, apply to CU Denver. And then if you get to CU Denver, do a semester there. And if you get more than 3.0, you'll get into Navy ROTC. Mm-hmm. And so I'm set, get all my medicals, everything ready. And then I found out that like a week before I was supposed to go into their like little week training thing, he called me up and he said, well, you're 1 point away. Even though I had a very high ACT score at that point, I think it was like 28. My ACT English score was 1 point off. And that's all I went off. So he said, we can't accept you. So you have to do a semester there and then another semester. But then I had been working this little job as a coffee shop, and the manager loved me so much. Her husband was a manager at Safeway and was like, come hire me on. I'll pay you like $15 an hour. It was like, something around that.
Good, right?
Yeah. I was like, oh, sweet. So I started doing that and working my way through college, and that was just so good. And I was like, all right, I'm going to just get my degree, and then I'll basically be able to pick which branch I want to go into. And so my wife and I were together the whole time. I think I gave her 2 promise rings, to push it off, but we eventually got married. I was 22. She was almost 22, 21, but somewhere around there. So we got married while we were still in college because it took me a little longer to work in the whole way through college. Like I bought a condo when I was 19. Actually, no, I was 18 when I still bought the condo. So like very early in life, like moving forward and doing the responsible things.
You majored in economics? Was that right?
I did. Yeah. And so majored in economics, got that. And then I was always big into flying.
Mhm.
So I actually had my private pilot's license. Was almost had my instrument license. Was really close to that. And then after 9/11 happened, like you start thinking about it, it's like, it'd be really cool to fly this really fancy jet, but would be even better than that is to lead men into combat. And so that's why I chose the Army.
That's what I love about Patrick, bro, right? You just talking to him, and then these other little nuggets just start popping out, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, I got my private pilot's license. You know, it's like,
Little
that's
unassuming.
awesome.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if you knew this. You probably don't, but Caleb had expressed wanting to be a pilot at one time in the military. And so I got him a bunch of lessons at the local airport here, and he got to fly and, you know, take off and touch down. So he's going to be pursuing his
At a Centennial?
No, they actually, that's where it was originally supposed to be at, but because Centennial's so busy, there's another airport up near the airport. It's not the DIA, but it's right off of DIA.
Front range.
Yeah, front range.
Yep.
It has less traffic. And so you
It's so much better.
Yeah.
Centennial will sit there waiting for like a half an hour to take off, and you're just burning your time.
Well, it's a
very
drive.
expensive.
Well, it's a little bit of a drive to get up there. But I didn't mind it because we got a lot of flying time. Every time that we've gone up, and we're going to continue it. We're homeschooling them next year. So we're going to get a lot more time to get up there and have them knock that out. But you know, the ultimate trust is letting your son, you know, I'm in the back seat. He's got his instructor in the front, and he's taking off. And the guy's like, all right, Caleb, you're going to land, you know, this next one. I'm like, what? No, he's not. Like,
No.
And so
I can't imagine, you know, I worry about my daughter driving.
Yes. Yeah.
You're flying.
But you know, it's just, I just love these little nuggets that come out while you talk to me. Just so humble, you know, that you just mention these little things like, oh yeah, got my private pilot's license.
Yeah. So it's, you know, we got married, and that's been the best thing. So I joined basically as soon as I graduated college, I joined the Army, and then went through, I had what we call a college option contract for OCS. And so I went through basic training just like everyone else, which was really easy for about the first 2 weeks.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden the drill sergeant started yelling, and Neville, get up here. Neville, get up here. Yes, drill sergeant. Neville, you're OCS? Yes, drill sergeant. And you just thought you could skate by without anyone knowing? Yes, drill sergeant. Hell no, you know. And yeah, my life.
Then that was it.
Yeah, it was good
changed.
up until like, you know, the last week, and then they were really cool because they just messed with me and everything. They wanted to make sure I could handle it. And,
so you're trying to just skate in the middle of the crowd there.
Right.
And all of a sudden the red flag came out.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, you know, join OCS, and actually OCS was a ton of fun. Like, I love that. My roommate.
Where was that at?
It was at Fort Benning.
Fort Benning, Georgia.
And my roommate was a guy who came here, couldn't speak a lick of English, from Lithuania. And he came here and joined the Army because he wanted to jump out of airplanes. He wanted to parachute. And he realized that's really not fun to do in the Army. You know, it's not like you can actually control anything.
Yeah.
It's, you know, you hit it and
You just jump.
Right.
Right.
It's not very fun. And so he got out, and then he finished his college and then came back in. And he actually ended up being our academic honor grad
Wow.
at OCS. But I loved OCS because it was one of those, you learn more about those who are around you, or more from those who are around you, than you actually do the instructors. Like, the instruction we were getting was good and everything. It wasn't like terrible, but gosh, just picking up stuff from some guy who's been in 10 years, and this little story that he passes on, or this little nugget you can take with you. And I think that really set me up for success, like later on in the military, because when I joined my unit as a platoon leader in Iraq. They'd already been there for 3 months. And I remember I first get there and everyone's like super busy. The commander barely.
Where in Iraq were you?
I was in Sadr City.
Sadr City.
So it was pretty
You were
hot
in the
heavy.
heat of it.
Yeah. And so obviously super busy, and you know, my commander didn't.
So wait a second. Your platoon was already there for 3 months,
Correct.
and then you pop in.
And then I pop in, you know, the new butter bar lieutenant, you know.
That's what I'm trying to understand here, right? So,
right. So
they're kind of like, yeah, here comes the new guy.
And even my platoon sergeant had actually cut his finger off, and so he was gone. So I didn't have a platoon sergeant or anyone.
You didn't have a senior enlisted guy to help guide you through.
So but
how was the platoon? Were they accepting of you and kind of helpful?
They were kind of a little, standoffish, right?
Yeah.
You're the new butter bar coming in.
Yeah.
You're clean sleeved. You know, we wear combat patches in our right arms, and everyone's got a combat patch but me.
For sure.
You know, and I'm suddenly in charge. And so I remember the first thing I did is I popped under the hood of one of my guys was working on this big truck, and I popped under the hood, and he's like looking at me all,
what are you doing?
Yeah.
Hey, sir. And I was
Don't
like,
touch anything.
Yeah. And I was like, this is all wrong. He's, what part of it, sir? No, I'm just kidding, man. I don't know. Show me what you're doing. How can I help? And that was kind of like my,
So
my
that's
mentality.
the way you broke the.
And then some guys like were breaking track on a big M88 wrecker and stuff. And they were kind of razzing me like, oh, well, put your coveralls on tomorrow, sir. And we're going to break track tomorrow. And I just remember that comment. Well, yeah, I woke up at 5 a.m. and broke track.
Showed up in your coveralls.
They were shocked,
Yeah.
And so,
well, you know what? That's interesting because you said you learned a lot at OCS, and I'm wondering, from a leadership perspective, if some of these little things didn't help, or was it just your personality that kind of, it doesn't come naturally to be able to go into a group of guys and be able to break the wall down like you did, because that's what you would want to see from your leader, right? Someone that was going to be a little goofy, not, I don't want to say goofy, but not as serious, where you said, yeah, you're doing it all wrong, right? And it's like, the guy's probably like, oh crap, like, am I doing it all wrong? You're like, no, I'm just kidding. I don't know what I'm doing. Just show me what you're doing. Right. Then it really lets all the stress and pressure down and saying, okay, now I can kind of connect with this guy. I can trust him. He just was humble enough to tell me he has no idea what he's doing. So
Right.
He's coming down to my level.
No, I think it was the OCS and just my ability to some of my personality, that's a lot of times you get in tough situations, I get out through humor and joking and stuff.
Sure.
And so there were times at OCS where guys would get in the thick of it. And it was a big thing. Like, you're a college op, so you're not an NCO, but technically I was an E5 going through OCS.
Yep.
And so I remember one time, these guys were getting into it and stuff. And this guy who was, he was a former sapper, ranger, dude was all tabbed out and everything. He's sitting on the side kind of watching. And I walked up and I was like, hey guys, we're all NCOs here. We don't need to argue like this. And that dude thought it was so funny. He thought it was hilarious. And so there's a bit of the humor on that, but just even the basics of my roommate, I get there in OCS and we had a different Kevlar than I had in basic. I'm like, how do I set this Kevlar up? And just being able to ask him, and he showed me, and just simple things like that.
Yep.
If I don't know, I should ask. I shouldn't try to pretend like I know.
Now, let me ask you this. You grew up Catholic, and I know what that's like. My wife grew up Catholic. I grew up in a neighborhood of Catholics. So I can't say I was Catholic, but I went to church with my Italian Catholic friends from Philadelphia. And it was fun because I got to hang out with them and learn a little bit about the faith. But I just learned, I think I've shared this before, that if I didn't eat meat on Friday and went to church on Sunday, I could live pretty much recklessly throughout the rest of the week. And that was good. But did you go into the Army with faith? Had you come to know the Lord at this point?
So I kind of knew of it, my dog tags, they said Catholic on it.
Okay.
I was kind of hurt because when I deployed to Iraq, my mom invited the priest to my going away party. We had a big going away party and everything for me. And
of course she did.
Of course.
That's what a good Catholic does.
Mom. Yeah. Especially good. Yeah.
Yes.
Good. We were Irish Catholic too. So especially,
there you go.
And so Roman Catholic, but Irish family.
Yes.
And so they refused to go because they were against the war. And so that kind of made me a little bit bitter. But then once I actually got into combat, got out there in Iraq, and there was some amazing, I'm not a brave dude at all, but there were times I'm like, how did I do that? Why did I do that? Something was with me. And just so there were times I actually went to, push back against the goad. I remember this one mission we were on in.
What were your primary missions in Iraq? So you went one time? You were just one deployment?
Right. So I was there for a year.
Okay.
Sadr City was our main effort. Sadr City. So for those listening, if you've seen American Sniper, where they're laying the barriers in those final scenes, that was where I was in. I brought in those convoys. They would lay the barriers down.
Got it. You actually said Chris Kyle was kind of part of on some of your deployment teams, correct?
He was, and he provided overwatch over me. I think he probably saved my tail along with some air weapons teams up there that were. It's great to be an American, especially with air weapons teams. Those are really cool.
Sure.
And Chris Kyle providing overwatch over you. And so, we were there, and there was this one mission. We were just doing long missions. So these missions would take 18 hours laying these barriers, and it was tough go because you start, getting fire or whatever happens, whatever your truck blows a tire, it just throws the whole mission off. And so this was supposed to be a simple resupply mission. It wasn't even a barrier mission, which usually I got put on the barrier missions, which are more difficult. This was supposed to be this quick little, we're resupplying this little combat outpost. It wasn't even really where the thick of it was. And our tactics were follow route clearance. And so route clearance, they kind of took this weird little off ramp, and we would kind of let them get a real big head start on us. And I remember, watching them and everything, like, we're gaining on them. Okay. But the combat outpost we were supposed to resupply was like only a mile ahead of where they stopped. And they were stopped at the off ramp. And normally I was the guy that always listened to my NCOs. And I would, hey, NCOs, like, what do you think? What do you think? And I got their opinion. They're like, let's just go. It's just a mile ahead. Like, and they're just on the off ramp. And like, this is really weird. We can't get a hold of route clearance. What's happening here? And I'm like, no, we're gonna hold tight. And the whole convoy was just furious at me when I got back. So we held and we waited. They had to get EOD on scene. Took another 7 hours, whatever it was, and we're all sitting there tired and groggy. We get back, and of course you do your after action review, and the whole room is just blasting me. Oh, we should have just gone forward. We should have just gone forward. And it wasn't until a month later, because obviously the route clearance guys, they're almost kind of like those guys, the most mad respect to me. I'd been on different missions with them where they literally took 7 IEDs in like a 3-block radius ahead of us, like real just bad, tough dudes. And I became good friends with their lieutenant, their platoon leader. And actually, I was a big Broncos fan, still am. And their lieutenant, I remember calling Kristi when I was in Iraq, and I'm like, can you just send me some Cleveland Browns stuff? And she's like, have you gone insane? What's happening? But I found out their lieutenant was a Cleveland Browns fan. So that's what I would do. Like, hey, man, you're really protecting me. You're looking out for me. So, I'd give him Cleveland Browns stuff. But I saw him on the DFAC and was having lunch with him. And he was telling me this crazy story of, man, there was this convoy following us, and we found this IED on the off ramp, and it was aimed right at the main highway. And for some reason, we couldn't get a hold on our BFT. We couldn't get a hold of that convoy. But luckily, they stopped. And if they hadn't, that IED would have taken out their lead truck.
And that was yours?
It was in my convoy. I wasn't the lead truck, but I'm like, I would have lost soldiers on that. So there was something in my gut. There was something out there other than me, like, because that wasn't normally my style to like push back against the common theme or even the NCOs that were telling me to push forward. Yes.
Good. Well, that's, in retrospect, you look back and you say, okay, Lord, was that you directing?
Right.
And obviously I believe he was. But how did that help you make decisions later on? People talk about a gut instinct, right? Or hearing from the Lord and pushing back against what everyone else is saying to do, because that's what we tell our kids, right?
Right.
If we tell our kids like, hey, don't get into the flow of the world, right? Don't run with the crowd. Don't be afraid to step outside of what everyone else is doing and make your own decisions, right? Obviously, this carries over into politics, right? Because you'll eventually tell us a story about how you got into politics. But here in the military, you're making a decision and you go back and you almost get confirmation that, man, that was a good decision, but I didn't know it at the time, right? So how did that help you make decisions later on?
So, there were several different things too. Like I just look back and like I said, I'm not a really brave and courageous guy, but I remember there were times like I would only let myself, and you had to go in battle buddy teams. So myself and my medic would always get out in the vehicles and stuff. And my medic he was a really brave guy. Like, sir, you got to stop running around like that. You're going to get yourself hurt. And just thinking about that and reflecting, but then I wasn't really deep in my faith. So I get back from Iraq. I actually have a bunch of different lung issues that I'm still dealing with today, and some back issues and other things. And, I couldn't pass SRP, it's basically our medical processing before you deploy, and couldn't do that. And so I ended up doing what was a previous major used to do. I did that as an O2, as a lieutenant, rear detachment commander, because my commanders really liked me and kept trying to hide me. And then my friends started getting pink slips. The military was downsizing. And I basically told my commander, like, quit hiding me. If I can't go and deploy and fight the bad guy, it's time for you process my MEB and start processing me out of the military. And so did that, was working a job at the U.S. Geological Survey, which was...
What year was this?
No, this was 2013.
2013?
Actually, about 2012. So 2012, and then it was kind of a unique program. So I was working this job at U.S. Geological Survey, and it was a great job for a conservative guy like me, because their whole goal was to downsize the military downsize their office space. And so I got to tell these like GS-14s and 15s, like, you're moving from this giant office to this little cubicle.
Yeah.
But I got kind of fed up with it, and I was getting really mad because I would find projects that would have 3-4 year payoffs, and the science center director would say, no, we're going to go with the one that has a 20-year payoff, because I want to show a higher budget so I can argue for a higher budget next year. And I'd get angry about that and upset and everything. And at the time, I mean, I was a total idol worshiper, and the Broncos were my idol. And Tim Tebow, he was on fire. And I'll never forget this game. I think it was the Pittsburgh Steelers, but I'll never forget
the playoff game.
No, I don't think it was the playoff game, or it might have even been the Vikings, but I'll never forget, like, we had no chance. And I said, like, the game was over, and I was mad. And I was the guy that would literally change jerseys, like, oh, this is going to make a difference. Or,
right,
and if I went to the game, I would literally, like, it'd be like freezing cold out, right. And I'd have it painted, like, my shirt off and painted, painted like whole face and, the chest and everything painted. It was really bad. Like, total idol worshiper. And I said, if Tim Tebow finds a way to pull this off, I'm going to go to church next Sunday. And then he did.
Yeah. I think I was at one of those games where he had one of those games where you were like, there's no way they're going to pull it out. Because we left in 2012, but I had stayed a Broncos fan and had made a trip or two back because I just say this, my favorite NFC team are the Eagles, and I just can't get that out of my blood. I was forced converted into an Eagles fan because we were new to Philadelphia. I showed up the first day of my elementary school with a Dallas Cowboys jacket on in inner city Philadelphia, and it didn't go well, But when we moved out to Colorado, I always adopt a home team. So we were out here in 2008. A lot of Philadelphia Eagles. Remember Dawkins? He was playing for the Broncos, and so I was like, yeah, I can root for the Broncos. Right. So they became my favorite AFC team, and so it was an amazing game.
Yeah, and so I said that, and growing up Catholic, really knew no different. Like my wife, we got married with her youth pastor because I was kind of going out of the faith at that time anyway, and we went to her youth pastor's church for a little bit, and it was kind of good, but not like a lot of whole substance in the church and everything. And I said that, and thank God for my wife, because she goes, you said that, and I'm holding you to it, and you're going to church next Sunday. So we just picked the closest church by. It was a Heritage Evangelical church at the time. We lived in Founders Village.
Yep.
I was always a super pro-life guy. And so walked into the church, and it happened to be Life Sunday. And he had pictures of babies in the womb and gave this great sermon on life. And I wasn't used to that. As a Catholic, normally you read one verse and it's just this, you stand up, you sit, you kneel.
So this guy was teaching from the scriptures.
Yeah, and he was actually doing it, and it was, whoa, this actually exists, and started going to church. And then eventually he started doing this 4-week-long sermon on Nehemiah, and at the time it was called The Road to Recovery. And he was teaching all these different leadership, like the whole time, about how Nehemiah was basically, like you were saying, pushing back against the goat, right?
Yep.
And was pushing back against like the common theme, like they were trying to gossip about him and trying to scorn him for what he was trying to do. But Nehemiah knew he was doing the right thing. And I'm thinking at times like, oh, in the military, I did that.
Yep.
In the military, I did that. And then the final message of that sermon, the 4 weeks, was, if God's prepared you for leadership abilities, it's time for you to step up and lead. And meanwhile, I had been facing terrible, terrible PTSD.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't know, because you don't talk openly about it. I mean, I didn't see anything public necessarily either. Was the fact that you were really injured in Iraq, and you had shared the story with me about these burns that were happening, and how it affected your lungs, and really, really, really gave you a great deal of stress, but also all the killing and all the IEDs that were happening, and not to mention Columbine. Right. like all of these things started to pile up with PTSD.
And it did. And so I was the whole time, like, as we're going through this 4-week-long sermon with Nehemiah, and I'm just facing this terrible PTSD. And
what did that look like for you, Patrick?
I mean, it was the point where I was getting maybe an hour of sleep a night at most. Like, it was getting really, really bad, and trying to be the typical, I'm a strong man, I could deal with this, and
I'll sleep tomorrow.
Even tried seeing some counselors, and the counselors are like, well, how does that make you feel? And you're like, well, how do you think it makes me feel? Like,
Now I'm angry. On an hour of sleep, like on an hour of sleep. How does it make you feel?
It was great escorting my soldier back to his final resting place. It was great to knock on that father's door. Like, you're getting mad because they don't understand it, and
for sure
wasn't helping at all. And so, luckily it started my faith walk, and I'm like, all right, time to be humble. And the dreams started getting really bad because I started including my family, and then that makes it really hard to sleep. And so I got down on my knees and said, God, what do I need to do? Like, I know you didn't send me to war and send me through all these things just for me to live a miserable life. So what do I need to do? Like, what are you trying to tell me? And then the next day, my dad calls me and says, Carol Murray's not running for her 4th and final term. Would you be interested in running?
This is 2013, 14?
2013.
Yep.
And I laughed and said, nah, Dad, that's, he's elected at this point. No, you're the elected guy. Like, if I ever get back into politics, because fast forward or rewind back to college, I actually interned for a family friend in college who was a state representative, and he said all the right things. And then when I went and interned for him and saw how he voted and how he acted in the Capitol, I was disgusted. And so at the time I swore off politics and said, like, I'm never going to be back in politics. Like, the only issue I really cared about was life. And I wanted to run a pro-life group. I never wanted to be elected.
Yep.
And so I laughed at him, and things didn't get any better PTSD wise. And that 4th and final message, even my wife's like kicking me in church and just nudging me going, are you listening yet, dummy? Like, you need to run. And so I decided I'm going to run. And then it was wild. The nightmare stopped.
So you had a faith moment. Right? Do you remember putting your faith in Christ at that moment when you were on your knees?
I do. And
like just total submission, like, Lord, I'm here. it's all yours. And
Absolutely.
Then this last little thing was, I still want to do what I want to do, and I'm not running.
Right. and then still, so like it took, like some people come to it a little bit easier than me, but God had to kind of whack me with a 2x4, and that 2x4 is my wife nudging me in church saying, you listening yet, dummy? And so
my wife's a 2x6.
Yeah. and so I'm still like going along and pushing through. And I remember writing my intro letter to all the delegates, and it was bold and hard hitting. And I'm thinking, I get done writing in my basement. I come up and things are busy. Things are crazy with the family. And I said, gosh, that thing is so bold. I need to tone it down. And I go to help my daughter with her Awana verse. And it was Joshua 1:9.
Oh.
I'm like, all right, got it, God. I'm going to leave it bold. And it was a big hit and ended up getting elected. And so
do not be afraid.
Right.
Yeah. So this is interesting too, Jared. I don't know if you knew this, but you ran in 2014, right? And you won by a majority. You won like 69% of the vote. And that's amazing.
Yeah.
Right? For someone that really didn't want to do it in the first place. A newbie to politics outside of your dad having some experience. But you won by a large margin in a Democratic state.
Right.
That's with someone that had strong convictions, which is bold, right? To be able to write that and say, hey, this is what I stand for, right? As a candidate. And these are the things that are important to me that I'm going to fight for. And
right.
And you did. And you continue to do that.
And I was still early on in my walk. So I get in and I loved being bold, but I forgot the second part of the verse of do not be dismayed. Because, I would be, if Joshua 1:9, that is, do not be dismayed.
And meditate on the word day and night.
So, I mean, but God was so good by surrounding me with good people. So I got in there and there were other legislators that kind of, we kind of stuck together and ended up winning the minority leader spot. With 3 years, I'd only had like 2 years in. So my second term, I became the minority leader. And I remember I took that over and I was like the dog that caught the car. I'm like, what do I do? Yeah. And so the first thing I did, the church I was at, Heritage Evangelical Church at the time, there was kind of some stuff that kind of went down and that pastor like had moved on. And so I called him up and was like, what are you doing? And he's like, would you want to come work for me? He's like, I've never done anything in politics. I'm like, I don't care. Like, so at this point I'm going to Calvary, and I'm loving Calvary. Absolutely loved Calvary.
So Dave was there by this point because David come in, we left when my dad was diagnosed with cancer in 2012. We moved back to New Jersey, and it was just about that time that the pastor prior to Dave had stepped down and David come in. And so Dave and I had some conversation on the phone here and there, but I didn't know him that well. But yeah, he was probably just trying to figure out how things. Yeah,
he was probably pretty new. I was new to the church. And I started going. My kids loved the children's ministry.
Tremendous Bible teacher, right? So,
without a doubt. Yeah. Loved Calvary, loved the church, but then it was great. So I had like best of both worlds. That pastor that, originally brought me on, and he actually discipled me and truly started making me understand what Jesus is as the true Redeemer and my relationship stuff I never got when I was growing up as a Catholic and stuff. And then he's right there with me. And that's, at least I wasn't smart enough. God was good enough to put me in place or put people around me that started building my hedges.
Yeah.
And so that's what kind of helped keep my strength my whole time in office.
Got it. What's some of the major major things you learned, going into politics? I mean, whether it be your first year, your rookie year, or as you became seasoned, because you swore off politics because there was a lot of hypocrisy in politics, right? Just like there is in the church or anywhere else, right? I think you ask a lot of kids who have walked away from the faith, they say, well, because there was hypocrisy in my family, right? So it's not that it's, that hypocrisy doesn't exist. It's just that what do you do with hypocrisy, right? As you're trudging along in politics and knowing that it's dirty and probably had to take your gloves off a few times for some battles, right? But what are some big takeaways that you learned through your political journey, which will be coming to an end soon? I don't know what your next endeavor is going to be. If you're going to run again for another office or what's going to happen. I'd like to see you run for governor, actually. But you got to get some Polis money to do that, right?
I swore it off, in 2005, and it didn't work out for me. So I'm not going to swear it off now.
Yeah.
Hopefully I don't have to run. But I would say the biggest thing I learned is obviously like early on in my political career, I did things because I wanted, I ran a pro-life bill every year, and it was because I wanted to be the pro-life guy. And it wasn't until my final year that I was crying the night before presenting that bill because I realized I did that with the wrong heart, the wrong intention. Yeah. And you need to do things to have the intention of being. So
what was that, the original intention? I mean, for the listeners that are listening, right? So you had this, I want to do it this way, right? And what was the motivation originally for that bill?
Originally for me, it was almost pride. I wanted to be prideful. I wanted to be the most pro-life legislator. And so I wanted to run a pro-life bill every year instead.
That was your badge. That was your identity.
Right. Instead of doing it for the glory of Christ. And so I would say that's the biggest thing I can say anyone trying to get into anything, but especially politics, if you're going to do it for the glory of God. And it goes back to bearing fruit. And bearing fruit in politics isn't always passing the most bills or getting that, just like it is in life. Paul bore tons of fruit. The guy was spent time in jail. He was persecuted. Bearing fruit doesn't always mean that it's going to be easy, and it's not what the world thinks bearing fruit is. It's not getting riches or passing these different bills or even getting reelected. Yep. I try to do things to make sure it was the right thing to do, but also really didn't understand that until my final term, to do things for the glory of God. And, I look back at famous figures in history like Abraham Lincoln. He lost, won the presidency, lost a child while he's in office, went through a civil war, like some major terrible stuff, and never got to see the work of his labors bear fruit. But man, he bore tons of fruit. And so we often get the short-sighted view of what it means to bear fruit. Yep. And it's not always that simple. And
some of us lay seed, some of us water, right?
Right.
But God does the rest. And a lot of times, when he's gracious enough to let us see the work, man, and we're very grateful for it. But a lot of times we'll never know this side of heaven, what's going to be born after, after the seed that we've laid or the water that we've put down. So, right.
And finding encouragement in doing that just for the glory of God, you'll find that encouragement and that content in your heart. If you're doing it for him. If I've ran different bills and they didn't pass, but I now have the content because I know I did it with the right heart in the mind for the glory of God. And so I have content in my heart.
Yeah. So when God brought you to that moment where you were totally convicted for not running this bill with the right heart, what did that help you in your faith journey later on?
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah. And I changed my whole presentation. My presentation used to be life is a conception. And if you disagree, and here's the logic of it, and you can explain all that. But instead it was, I come to you, presented in front of a committee of a lot of unbelievers, said, I come to you as a sinner, and my sin is no different than anyone else who's had an abortion. And I come to you presenting this bill in that manner, in a humble manner. And so it was very, very different presentation, basically laying out how I'm just as much of a sinner as anyone else has. And I hope I softened some hearts in that conversation, and as other bills that were brought forward too. I softened some hearts because I think a lot of times, especially in the pro-life movement, we forget about that. They say that 1/4 of people have had an abortion. That means 50% of women have had an abortion. And so we forget that. A lot of times they're pushed in certain circumstances and they don't want to feel like they've done wrong. And usually it's the men are just as bad or just as guilty because they're usually pushing them to have an abortion. And so we don't we don't come with that like softened heart that, yes, my sin is no different than yours. And we need to do it with that softer heart to explain to them that we truly understand their situation, or not even understand it, because there's no way to truly understand it. Sure. But we can grieve with them and come alongside with them. And it's not an attack on them. We're just trying to save babies.
Yeah. Well, I think that goes back to your previous stories of just meeting people where they're at, right? Whether it be the guy under the hood of the truck, and just coming down to someone else's level and understanding and having empathy. And I think Jesus did that a lot in the scriptures, right? He came down to people's level and was able to identify with people. He didn't excuse sin, but he certainly had an understanding of what people were going through in their situations. And I think that's having the heart of Christ, and it was worked out in you through this time in politics, right? So what's next for Patrick?
Well, right now I'm working for Young Americans for Liberty. It's great. It's a great organization.
What do they do for listeners that don't know what that is?
So we are hoping that this week we will come. So I was part of their legislative coalition back in 2019 when there were about 30 of us sitting in a room. And this week, I think we're going to hit 250. And so Young Americans for Liberty is an organization that focuses on state house races. And then they also have a big college campus arm. And they basically train these youth leaders in college campuses. They'll come and support them. First off, let them know you're not alone. So connect them with other liberty-minded people on college campuses. And then beyond that, they'll fight for them. So if the college campus is saying, you can't say that or whatever reason, or there's this different mandate that we're putting on, we'll actually defend them sometimes with lawsuits or put pressure on the administration. But then we take the best of all of those activists. And this next week, I'll be in Orlando with 1,000 best of them that have applied. And we'll be training them, basically energizing and equipping them and training them on how to actually go and get involved in elections. And that's how that we elect all these different state legislators. And these are good, solid legislators. And I'm telling you, I was feeling so lonely in 2019, like, gosh, there must not be many of us. And then I joined this coalition and realized, and I've become lifelong friends with people. And so we're going to be about 5% of state legislators nationwide, which is a huge number. And so this coalition last year alone passed, I think it was 136 bills that made 91 million Americans more free.
Yep.
And so it's a really cool organization. And the way I see it, it's like a great way for me to continue the work I've done, my experience, and sometimes more fruitful ground than blue Colorado. But
yeah, well, I mean, is there a ministry opportunity there as well, Patrick? I mean, obviously at this level, there's a strong conservative base, but are there evangelicals in this pool that really are walking the walk?
Oh, I see a huge ministry opportunity. I think there's a lot of people that they can become liberty-minded by reading different philosophers, but the best liberty-minded folks really come there through their walk in faith. And you don't really understand free will and everything else through the Bible that they give us. And once you understand that, then you actually become a true liberty-minded warrior, because you understand that relationship with Christ and how it's pretty inseparable to true liberty and the founding of America.
Got it. Hey, so I wanted to ask you, as a dad, raising a family, Kristi was she pregnant when you did your first deployment? Was that right?
I left when I think Kate was 8 days old.
Kate was 8 days old, and you left for a year, right? And then you get out and you transition into politics. So that took a lot of time. But how do you navigate being a dad and a husband through, whether it be deployments or, through a political career that caused you late nights at the office, I'm sure. I mean, there's a couple of times, I think, as you were wrapping up to do turnovers, you're like, oh yeah, these next 2 weeks, man, I know I'm going to be, 14, 16 hour days. Right. And so how do you navigate that as a dad wanting to raise your daughters up in faith, obviously, and then obviously minister to your wife, through these different, vocations that you're in. So how do you juggle all that?
Yeah, it's certainly been difficult, especially, in the political life. You obviously had in the military, being gone for a year and going through all that, and they can kind of see it. But I think having that public profile that I had, especially when I was minority leader, was really tough, because it was fun at first. Oh, I can take my kids to the Capitol and have a great time. And then all of a sudden my family started getting death threats.
There you go. Yep.
And I can't take my kids to the Capitol anymore. I don't want photos of them out there. And they're seeing it and trying to balance that. And, in some ways, I guess it's been a bit of a blessing because I think it's made Kate, especially because she's really seen it and been mature enough to actually walk through it all. It's made her like stronger in her faith.
Yeah.
Because she actually sees that example that I'm setting. And it's made her stronger. Now we'll see. Lydia was kind of younger. She's only 6 now. And so it's a little more probably difficult for her to understand. But I think setting that example of how you can do that has been, a blessing as a father.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously the time away is really difficult.
Yeah.
So the time away has been tough.
How do you keep up with it? You do Zoom calls or like, do you do devotions with your girls or pray for them, on the phone while you're away? I mean, what does that typically look like as a parent or as a dad or a husband while you're away?
Yeah, it's one of those things that, even there was times where I couldn't because I'd be on a big floor battle and you can't even really take a phone call from them. But I think one of the things that I tried doing is at least building those hedges in a certain way, especially for my wife to know that you want to make sure that your reputation and your integrity is totally intact. And even if your integrity, you think it's intact, even the perception that might come from how you act or interact can hurt a marriage or hurt a family. So I tried, that's why I did that. I, hired my former pastor and I
love that about you. Because you had your brother, right? Your brother was with you a lot of times, especially when you traveled.
Right.
And you had accountability with this former pastor. And so you put a hedge of protection around your reputation and your integrity. And Jared and I talk about that a lot with guys that travel, or if they're working long hour at night. And, Jared talked about this one lady that he used to work with used to try to get him to go to social hour, happy hour after work, and how she was able to reel in some guys,
right.
That were, that didn't even give it a thought, where Jared was like, no, I see this.
Yep.
I see where this is going. Yep. Right. But a lot of guys don't take that seriously.
Even if they're not, it's one of those things. So Mike Pence was made fun of, Mike Pence rule, which is really the Billy Graham rule, before that. And it's one of those things that I tried to do, because that was one of the things that I wanted to make sure that was intact. People attacked me for all sorts of other different lies, but no one's ever attacked me for, womanizing or cheating on my wife or anything like that. And I tried doing that by building those hedges so strong that no one could ever even accuse me of it.
Yeah. Well, that's,
and it's been, it's actually been a great evangelical experience. I think even in there, it's not been really discipleship, but I remember my first year in, there was a lady that was bringing a bill up, and totally different eye-to-eye worldview, but she brought up this bill that said you have to have all this STD testing and everything if you're pregnant, made it mandatory, and I was voting against it. She couldn't understand why I was voting against it. I was like, well, why would you make my wife go through that? So my wife was, pregnant at the time, I think, too, and or so it might have been my third year in, but I remember telling her, well, my wife's my one and only, and I'm her one and only. I remember the look of shock on her face, and I think it was a mixture of, whoa, you guys actually exist, and oh, you're actually normal. Like, I can laugh and joke with you, but you actually exist. And so it's kind of like you get some of those unique evangelical, experiences in there too, where people can look back and maybe you soften their heart. Maybe something happens in their life and they go, that guy really seemed like he kind of had it together. And what is that? Why is that? And I made it very clear in my final speech in the House too, that it's because of my faith, and that's what drives me. Yeah.
Were there any outward assaults with people trying to entice you while you're in office? We hear about this in politics. I think you and I were talking about this, one of these other politicians. I think the guy that's in the wheelchair. What was his name again? Do you remember?
Oh gosh,
starting to see. But he had kind of threw a rock at the glass house, and all of a sudden, everything came crashing down on him. I can't think of his name right now, but anyway,
Madison,
yeah. Madison. So we were talking about the fact that he had all these dark secrets in his closet, that came crashing down after he made a couple of off-centered accusations. But has anyone does this happen in politics a lot?
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll see it from different lobbyists and everything else, and yeah, certainly has happened to me. But I think it happened to me like early on because they tried that method, sending in a certain lobbyist that they thought could get to me through that manner because it worked with other people, and they realized real quickly that it didn't. So by my even my second term in office, that didn't work anymore. Instead, they were sending in the subject matter expert, and he's usually, well, not usually, but sometimes it was the older guy who'd been around for a long time, but sometimes it was, a young girl that could actually hit the bullet points, but she wasn't, was approaching me in a very professional manner, not a different manner.
Yeah. Well, good. We're wrapping up this podcast. I'm going to ask you we have this thing that we do called Final Thought, and then Jared will probably chime in at some point as well. But if God's put something on your heart during this podcast or something even before that you'd like to speak in the men's lives, that are listening, that are inspired by your story, that they're listening, thinking, if this guy can do it, I can do it. Someone that's sitting on the edge of either politics or joining the military or, changing vocations because the Lord's nudged their heart. What are your thoughts?
I mentioned it earlier, but Joshua 1:9 really sticks with me. And I always remember the first part of it of, have I not commanded you? Be bold and courageous. I remember that part.
Yep.
It's also, do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God has you, essentially. And so, remember that second part too, because I didn't always remember that. And so once you realize the book has been written and you know how it ends, God wins, and you can just be after his heart, and how that is truly an end in itself and gives you content in your heart once you truly understand that, then you can do some amazing things. You may not realize it in this lifetime, or the world may not realize it, but you yourself can be content. Your family can be content. Your family can see that and can be passed on, and it can become that seed, or it can even become the vine itself that actually produces that true fruit. And sometimes we misunderstand, like I was saying earlier, the fruit and what that truly means, because fruit in this world is not like, Joel Osteen will say, where it's, let's, who has the biggest plane, who has the most money, who has the most wealth. Nothing's wrong with that. And if you do have that, use it for good. Yep. That's great. But, sometimes it's being that persecuted person who can actually go through this and come out on top with still not being dismayed, can give courage to others and plant that seed to others. And so I think in Colorado, I look back at some of the elections and how it all worked, and I didn't pass a lot of bills, and I'm hoping that's what I could be. I'm not dismayed. I'm still very encouraged in my faith. The book's been written. God's won. Now it's our time to be salt and
light. Be not dismayed. What about you, Jared? Any final thoughts?
No, I kind of wanted to circle back. Like, one of the things that struck me when you were talking about like the bill, and kind of like the thing that kind of related to me, because like in 2020, like I got huge into like really deep holes in politics and things like that, because I was laid up with an injury and I had nothing else to do, and I went down the rabbit hole, and I got like really fired up, and like really, I mean, it was a good year.
He's getting fired up again. Look at it, Patrick.
But one of the things, like pro-life for me was always like a big one, and like I've gotten, in the past, like I would get like really angry at other people. And, the first thing that God showed me through that was I'm expecting unbelievers to have my faith and to have a moral background that doesn't exist. But then the other thing was, as far as like how people are in today's culture. And then, at church, we've been going through Genesis, and we're talking about Jacob right now. And we can look at Jacob and be like, wow, he had 2 wives. And then their wives gave up their maidservants to him. So like now he's been with 4 women, and a lot of like churches today, like some of them skip over that because like they don't know how to talk about it. But like Dave did such a great job to say like that was the culture norm of the time, right? And like that was normal. They were being part of the culture. They were just doing what the culture does. And in today's society, abortion, that's the culture norm. Like that's part of the normal society. And I think that if men that are listening that are really big into politics, that are like very staunch conservatives, I think a better way to approach it is kind of like how you had that reckoning, was viewing it as that it's part of culture, but how do I fight that culture norm? How do I challenge through the lens of Jesus, the culture norm? And then if we see it that way, I think we then come off more eloquent. When you presented yourself as a sinner, I mean, I look back at like the times I've had conversations with people, and how I've presented my political viewpoints, or I've had my my moral belief system. And I'm like, oh, you know, I don't think I've humbly said like, I'm the chiefest of sinners, you know, and like kind of like how we approach conversations with non-believers is we can't expect them to believe the same thing that we did. Yep. But if we, with honor, integrity, strength, and grace, like, you know, what Uncommon Disciple like stands for, you know, if we approach them with that and through a humble spirit, you know, I think that's how that's a crazy thing, I think, to approach things today in society.
Yeah. You know, I write about it in my book as well, that I was really surprised, you know, during the election cycles where I saw believers, strong believers, get more fired up about their political affiliations than they did about the faith, right? And I think that comes from a heart of pride, you know, where they can't see past a candidate because of their prideful heart. Whereas, hey, you know, I don't care the way you voted. Where's your heart with Christ, right? And is your faith aligned with the way you're voting? I mean, at the end of the day, right? Because there's some guys that may be conservative. We talked about this earlier a little bit. I won't mention names, right? But they're certainly not voting on a faith-based platform at all, right? That you would really raise your eyebrows and go, well, like, but I always vote that party, you know? And it's like, well, I'm not voting for that guy for sure. So I you know, I think it's very important that as believers in Christ, that we're careful. You know, we're just careful about making our political affiliations our idols. Yes, or your candidates your idols. Yeah. Just like the Broncos were a false idol for me, don't let your political candidates be a false idol. Yeah. I'm a sinner. I'm fallen. I am not deserving of his grace. And that's who we're after. We're after his heart. Yep. Yep. Well, thanks for coming on, bro. I was excited to have you on, and it's just so good to have you sitting here and talking straight to men, into men's lives. So we hope to have you back sometime soon. You bet. Gentlemen, thank you again for listening to and supporting the Uncommon Disciple podcast. Be sure to visit our website, uncommondisciple.com, and download the 12 attributes of godly men.
And while you're on the internet, go ahead and run over to YouTube, like and subscribe to our channel. On our channel on YouTube, we're going to have a lot of bonus content, a lot of videos and behind the scenes, so you don't want to miss out on that.
And if you've enjoyed the content and what we've put out here with our guests, give us a follow on Instagram or Facebook, and you won't miss any of the announcement or events that we have coming up. So be brave, be courageous, and be uncommon.